State Representative Dan Brady, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. It's good to see you again. We haven't been able to get together with the COVID restrictions over the last couple of years like we used to in the Capitol. But now you're running for Secretary of State. And for the viewers, I will remind them that Jesse White has been the Secretary of State for the last 24 years. He is not running for re-election, so this is the first time in quite a while that Jesse White is not on the ballot, and it is a competitive race. Dan Brady is the Secretary of State candidate for the Republican Party. And here from, Dan, your website, and we'll get into the issues, but I just wanted to set it up for the audience. Some of the things that you're focusing on with increasing organ tissue donation, streamlining the Secretary of State services, enhancing services for older adults, provide better driver education, and prioritize local library development. A lot of people, Dan, probably only think of the Secretary of State's office for driver services and don't know that there are a number of other things that the Secretary of State's office does. So with that as a setup, why don't you give us your pitch as for why you should be the next Secretary of State, and what would you do with the office to make some improvements?
Well, first off, thanks again for the opportunity to be with you, Terry. I greatly appreciate it. And I look forward to our discussion here. In regards to why, I get asked that a lot, why am I running? When in this world of remap, or the state of new remaps, running for re-election as state representative might have been an easier pathway to go politically. But this is an opportunity that presents itself not only with Secretary White retiring, but it's an opportunity of an office to where I've aspired to. This particular role in business, in county government, where I was very involved with Secretary of State's office in organ and tissue donation issues, distracted driving for teens, and then moving over into my role as representative, where I enhanced those areas, worked with Secretary White on pieces of legislation, senior services in particular. My most recent legislation signed into law was dealing with defensive driving for seniors in an 8-hour remote course that they could take and receive potentially discounted insurance by their insurance provider. All those type of things, and the business background that I have, I think lends well to what the operations of this office is. Yes, you're right. Many people think of this office solely as driver services related across the state, but about 20 divisions in the Secretary of State's office with a little over 4,000 employees touches the lives of more daily on a daily basis of Illinoisans than any other executive branch office. Everything from becoming a notary public to getting that driver's license or business articles of incorporation or titling of vehicles, its own police division, and the list goes on as far as registration of lobbyists and on and on, and capital security. So a variety of functions, and a number of those services I've been involved with in county government, in private business, and as state representative.
I believe I've heard you talk several times during the course of the campaign. I believe you were saying about just different things that the office could do that is not being done, maybe some technological improvements. Can you go a little more into detail on what some of those ideas are?
There's two things I hear a lot on the campaign trail, and I have ever since even before becoming the Republican nominee and up to today's discussion. And that is, number one, can you cut the wait times at facilities? And number two, how about reducing some of those fees? We've talked to, in fact, I filed legislation regarding the fee aspect of things in the temporary reduction of plate renewals, of sticker renewals, and then also about the lines. The Secretary of State's office needs to be brought into the 21st century. I've talked a lot about remote services, increasing those. I've talked about the digital divide and the problems that the Secretary of State's office has as far as communications, even internally, from a technological standpoint of the Secretary of State's office, and more remote services. Way more than just trying to improve a website, which I learned yesterday while in the Chicagoland area needs improving for a couple different reasons. One person coming thinking because the website showed the office was open when it was closed. And those type of things are the frustrations of what the customer experiences and can be improved upon. When we have a situation to where remote services can be improved. Everything from using our libraries as the chief librarian, over 5,000 libraries in the state of Illinois, possibly to have kiosk machinery to be able to renew at a license or a renewal license for at a library. All the way to talking about partnering with community colleges, which I talk a lot about, and prioritizing the heaviest foot traffic areas where the greatest problems are, the wait times, where people are standing out in the cold, standing out in the heat, waiting to get services. And that's what this office is about. Its focus and priority should be public service. And that's something I've talked a great deal about. Now, a lot of those areas can be improved upon, and that's what this campaign is all about.
You know, it's interesting as you point out, and I think you're right. I think it's something that people don't think about, that the Secretary of State's office is maybe the office that people interact with most often. None of us really interact with the state treasurer's office or the attorney, hopefully not the attorney general's office, but we do go to driver's licenses. One of the things that Secretary White did, and I think he's been, applauded for that, is try to get more organ donations. And we still have, unfortunately, across the country, people dying who would be saved if we had more organ donations and if people would think to sign the back of their license or make it known to their family members. You had that as one of your issues. Can you talk a little more about that? What changes would you see happening that might make an improvement in that organ donation system?
Sure. We have thousands of people that are on the organ donation, the transplant waiting list, not only in Illinois, but across this country, but specifically to Illinois. And to Secretary White's credit, at one time, Illinois was the leader in organ donation registration. That has changed. That has slipped in Illinois. I want to bring that back. And the way you do that is by causing attention, discussion, and education, and make it more available. And that's where the library idea comes in. That's where the focus comes in on my background as a former county coroner. I worked with Secretary White on legislation, first-person consent. I was the chief architect, one of the chief architects of allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to try and increase these numbers to go on the organ donor list when they register and receive a new license with the parental opt-out. So increasing those numbers are extremely important. And quite frankly, an individual mother or father who has a son or daughter on an organ transplant list waiting doesn't care if that's coming from a Republican or Democrat. What they want to know and are hopeful for is that the communication is there between Gift of Hope, where I'm a former board member, the hospitals, the transplant teams, and the entire aspect of how we're going to make sure the communication is there morning, noon, or night to make sure we have the opportunity to bring life to someone else out of someone else's tragedy. I'm the only candidate that has that experience. I'm the only candidate in that area that has actually sat with families and made the ask after they've lost a loved one, have you considered organ donation or tissue donation? And so I believe that experience is invaluable for me as the next Secretary of State, as one of the major roles the office undertakes.
Before we go into any more issues, for people who haven't heard of Dan Brady as a state representative, there's a lot of voters across the state who may not have ever heard of you or know nothing about your background. Why don't you give us a bit of a bio and tell us about, I of course know you've been a longtime member of the state legislature, but why don't you just give us an overview? What do you bring to the table?
What I bring to the table is the business background. What I bring to the table is my county government service and my service as state representative. Now, every one of those life experiences, which my opponent does not possess, interacts with the Secretary of State's office, business, government, and obviously state legislature. To back up, state legislature, I've highlighted some of the legislation and work I've done with Secretary White and his office. I've been involved in the budget process of the budget, which is over $474 million in itself, over $10.5 million alone in leases for approximately 96 facilities, driver's service facilities across the state. And then back to county government in particular, not only the organ donation side of things and awareness we talked about and my experience there, but distracted driving for teens. I have been a voice for improving the actual curriculum that has been part of driver's education throughout the state through the Secretary of State's office as well as the state legislature, and working with and want to continue to work and pledge my support with groups such as the Illinois High School and College Drivers Education Association in the state, which makes up driving professionals, teachers across the state of Illinois, and enhance that, in particular, background for behind the wheel for a student. Not so much just the video side of things, being out on a course to drive the vehicle. You're going to most likely drive like Tire Rack, a private partnership between schools and drivers education services that shows a student what it's like to drive a 2,000-pound vehicle and how it's going to react or not react when you get yourself in trouble. And then also the Secretary of State's police to bring them back into the classroom and talk about with students, what's it mean? What's a title? What's the title mean going to a lien holder? What's it mean when you have problems with your license and you end up in the Administrative Services, the Secretary of State's division, and what's that's going to cost you and the problems it's going to cost? And then the other thing, which is very short-sighted, I think, from the General Assembly, is what the use of marijuana is doing to those who are behind the wheel and the dangers and the lack of any type of testing that we have for that, field testing like we do for a DUI situation.
You know, sometimes we hear of candidates. I know when I used to interview Judy DePinka when she was state treasurer, she would go to the Association of State Treasurers around the country, and you would talk about, what are you doing in Nebraska? What are you doing in Florida? And if they were doing something that was a good idea and had proved effective, they, she was saying how, you would adopt it to try to do it here in Illinois. I don't know if you've had that opportunity at all, or if any ideas. Again, this is kind of along the ideas of what would you do differently, but are there some of those ideas that maybe worked in other states that we ought to adopt here? Number two, as far as we always hear about the cost of government, and you've talked about technology. I don't know how many Secretary of State has a lot of employees because you have offices across the state. I don't know, do you see changing the amount of employment? Do you see changing the funding? Is there anything, when you talk about technology, would that mean spending more money, or would that technological change actually lower the cost of government?
Well, I think first off, it would lower the cost, but I've approached this in a variety of ways. Number one, something that can be done relatively inexpensively and right away, and that is prioritizing by fully staffing these facilities across the state, especially the ones where we have the greatest wait times, and cross-training employees. There's really two reasons why you end up at a driver's facility. Number one is vehicle services, or number two, driver services, and that's what brings people in. Having a employee on the other side of that counter that can talk to you and navigate through the process and help you for both of those, either one of those services, means that when you get to the end of the line, you don't get told, she or he's not here today who does that. I don't know how they do it, and you're going to have to come back. That cross-training would be very, very important. The other thing I talked about is prioritizing those areas that have high volume foot traffic. Let's say Lombard, for instance. What's the closest community college of our 38 campuses across the state of Illinois to where a community college might want to look at leasing space? And that space has something that's built into it already: technology, the digital aspect of things, cyber, also cyber protection, accessibility, community. Most people know where the community college is. A safe environment area. Some particular areas, like in my district, at Heartland Community College, is already doing CDL drivers testing because of their space availability. A lot of community colleges hold that potential. Taxpayers are already paying for those services, and they all possess something that's very important to the consumer. It's called public transportation. They have the technology built in already and hold potential of trying to prioritize where we could get more efficiency from those offices. And the other thing, you talk about going to associations and states, 25 other states already have e-titling services. E-titling mean What we're still doing in Secretary of State's office is paper titling, transferring, which is taking up to months. So when you buy a vehicle, of which there's about 1.3 million last year, old and new vehicles sold in Illinois, that's paper titling that's moving through the process. That's stymieing banks, credit unions for the transfer of those titles, it's getting to the lien holders. It is not giving law enforcement adequate information when they stop a vehicle of who actually owns it. 25 other states have e-title to make that in process that's accomplished in hours. It's still months in Illinois. We can do that. The state legislature, with my vote, just re-upped in 2019 the vote for the blueprint for this process of e-titling service, electronically titling services, to be done by July 1st of 2022. Yet we still have no system in Illinois. What do I know about systems? Similar to that, I created the electronic filing of birth and death records in the state of Illinois, which we've had for a number of years. And I did that by partnering with public health, vital statistics, and going out and securing a vendor to make it a reality. And so that's the type of experience that I think is invaluable for the next Secretary of State to have, and that I possess.
There are a number of things, I don't know them all, that if you were the Secretary of State, you could do on your own initiative because you would be the head of the department. There's many other things that you might want to do that you have to go through the legislature to have that, a rule change, and whatever, some of the things you've already talked about. Tell us to what extent on some of these ideas. Have you shared any of these ideas with other members of the legislature over the years? And to what extent would the fact that you have been a part of the Illinois House of Representatives for, I don't even know off the top of my head how many years, but you've been there for quite a while, that you have these relationships, to what extent would that allow you to maybe gain some of these changes that you want to make the Secretary of State's office more efficient?
Well, to your point, I think it's, again, invaluable, extremely valuable experience. As Deputy Republican Leader in the House, where I've been state representative since 2001, and the relationships I have been able to build across the aisle, working especially in appropriations higher education, and knowing that in the minority, I have to work with the majority party to get things done, and to advance issues within the Secretary of State's office. Who better suited than an individual such as myself that has that experience with my fellow colleagues in the state legislature? And I think that is something that would help greatly in trying to advance technology improvements and other improvements in the Secretary of State's office. Certainly having that rapport, which is something Secretary White, former representative himself, was very, very good at. And Jesse certainly was a people person. He was an individual who worked with the legislature. And also, I know in another aspect from being a state legislator, one of the main things that a senator or representative has to deal with the Secretary of State's office and issues related to the Secretary of State's office. I know how important it needs to have a liaison and a legislative aspect to be able to help that senator or representative serve their constituent and cut through the red tape that government's so good at. I've done all of that.
Yeah, and I would say, and you touched on it, but just sometimes there's so much that we sometimes forget that the people who don't spend their time at the Capitol don't necessarily know. But Secretary of State's office on the business services, if you want to incorporate in whatever form or fashion, handles the filing of the corporations, whether it's an LLC or what other kind of a corporation you have. You handle, as you refer to, the CDL, the commercial driver's license. And we had under Blagojevich about 20 years ago where he raised the filing for the truck drivers. So many of these trucking lines moved their trucks out of the state of Illinois, and it didn't make money for the state. It cost us a lot of money because of that change. These are some of the things, just to give the viewers a little bit of background, where some of these issues don't sound significant, but they can be very significant as far as trying to make it easier on the business community to conduct business. And I can only imagine how much easier might it be for some of the car dealerships if they could, while they're there, go online and maybe even do a title transfer, the amount of efficiency it might take. You know, I use the example, this interview that you and I are doing years ago, not too many years ago, after I did an interview, it would take me 3 or 4 hours to edit the video and go from camera 1 to camera 2. Now with the technological change, when we're done, the video's done. It has all the graphics on it and everything else ready to go. These are the kind of things, if we could get government, and so often over the years I've said, it's almost like a vampire when you talk to people in government about efficiencies. It's like they hold up the cross. No, we don't want any efficiencies here. So I just want to underscore for people, the Secretary of State's office, certainly under Jesse White, I think he was pretty beloved by both sides of the aisle. He was not overtly political, and I think he was an easy guy to work with. As we close out, because I know you got a campaign to run here, would you envision following in the mode of a Jesse White, where you are providing services for everyone in the state, that it is not necessarily a partisan political entity? And then just if you would, go ahead and make your closing argument as to why people should vote for Dan Brady for Secretary of State.
Sure. Well, to your point again, I would simply say what I hear from most people is not so much a partisan role of this office as Secretary of State, but a party of efficiency. What we want is to be able to have efficiency in the office. We want a better experience on both sides of that counter, meaning the customer and the employee, to give that employee the resources, training, and help that they need to be able to provide that better experience for the customer. That certainly can be done. But it can only be done and enhanced by a Secretary of State who's going to be visible, who's going to be approachable, who's going to respond to people, and it's going to be out in the greatest contact area that Secretary of State's office has seen in the role, and that's in motor services divisions across the state. As I say, you won't just see my picture hanging on a wall at a Secretary of State's facility. You're going to see me in those particular facilities, helping, learning, and quite frankly, I've learned as a legislator, some of the greatest ideas in appropriation hearings did not come from maybe a director or president. It came from rank and file employees who do the work and who have the ideas to improve that. That would be Dan Brady's style. I think very similar to Secretary White's style. And I would also say that in closing, I've highlighted my business background, my county government background, and my state legislature background, touching upon so many services that the Secretary of State's office provides, driving services, trying to enhance teen driving and education, organ tissue donation, senior services, and making sure we remind ourselves that not everybody's so tech savvy, and we still have to have the ability for those who need maybe a little extra hand holding and need to move to the front of the line, as the Secretary's office does now for seniors, which is great, and to help all those that come in, but also help reduce that traffic by those who want more remote services. And we can do that. We can take leads from other states. But having the experience, the well-rounded experience that I possess and bring to the table on day one is not part of the background or resume that my opponent has. And I've worked my entire adult life towards this goal. And one thing I think is important, Jerry, I'm not using this office to run for this office as a springboard to something else. This is an office that has been my entire career, that I've interacted with, and I bring so many assets and ideas and interaction experience firsthand that this office is responsible for to the table. And I believe that makes me the better choice to be the next Illinois Secretary of State.
Well, I think anyone who does business in the state of Illinois, and even if you don't, probably you're aware. It's just we have people fleeing the state. We have businesses who are so often pulling their hair out because we seem to go out of our way too often in Illinois to make it more difficult to do business than in some of the other states. So any kind of efficiencies, and even if that weren't the case, just in general, 50 years from now, the office of Secretary of State can't be operating the same way it is in 2022. We have to make these changes as we go along. And I think you made a good case for how you would approach the office. I am sorry that most of the media seems not to give the attention. This is a very important office, so I would encourage viewers to learn more. They can go to your site again, and Dan Brady, let me bring it up. VoteDanBrady.com. There it is, VoteDanBrady.com to get some more information. And Dan Brady, we appreciate getting together again and having you share your thoughts on your campaign.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I ask for the citizens' vote across Illinois.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.